Cheers. Now, on the issue of time given to the critics, I think 15 minutes was too long. If you are unable to say within 5 minutes what I would say, then you don't have something really serious to say. 15 minutes took it to a boring level. That's what it is. Tell you that finally, on the issues of gender, we should be careful so that we do not take this gender business to a crass level, a level that will begin to backfire. I'm picking on the last speaker on the issue of, this gender thing. There are certain things we cannot run away from. Like my wife, if my wife doesn't sweep in my house, who will sweep in my house? Yes, I sweep, but my wife should also sweep. So let us not superimpose unnecessary Western falsehood on your own milieu. Yes, we should remember who we are. If we trade in everything on the international conversation table without putting it on that table, we must have lost everything about us and our history. I rest my case. Thank you.
When I came and sat here and people were talking there, I was thinking I was in a classroom and I learned so much. I think the contribution of the panelists is to enrich the work that they done. Great work. And that's what I got from the reviews that the panelists did. And coming here to say that women trying to address, working with like-minded men to address the historical injustice done against women is copying from the Europe or America is very sad. And especially the person talking about this, I watch him every day on TV defending the rights of workers. And you are thinking that the rights of women and girl child do not count. Then he's fighting for one injustice and supporting another injustice. It's very sad. I must commend the panelists and the great work. I was so sorry I missed the presentation of Professor Joy Ezio. And I think the conversation needs to continue. We've been talking about the plight of domestic workers. Hearing from one of the panelists, the outcome of the report, seeing contradiction from what the domestic workers said and what they got, the final outcome was giving me serious concern. I was thinking whether they don't want to say what they actually experiencing in the homes or what went wrong. I think it's a conversation that we need to continue. And if your wife, it's not compulsory that your wife must sweep your house because she didn't come there to sweep your house. It's a partnership. Anybody can sweep the house. Well, you can't come in a public space and put it as an order. You are belonging to 16th century, not this 21st century. Please, you need to work on your mind and accept that we are in the new century. Thank you.
Oh my, very interesting.
I want to appreciate the funder of this research. I want to thank them for a job well done. Because the issue of domestic workers generally in Nigeria seems the work they do seems feasible. And the care work provides the foundation for the work we do. Like me, I don't have a nanny at home, or I don't have a security man at the gates. Who does the work? Well, one thing I want to say is that this project has raised the awareness about domestic workers in Nigeria. And secondly, the work done by this group, I think they could have, maybe it's an oversight, they could have contacted the Nigerian Labour Congress, the Labour Center, who are able to give us from inside, because I know when you talk about a domestic worker, because the Nigerian Labour Act describes a worker. It doesn't describe whether you're a domestic worker, you're a staff. So far there's an employment relationship between two persons. There will be an employer, there will be an employee. That person is gathered as a worker. So there's no way you talk about a worker in Nigeria without talking about the labour centers. The labour center will be able to contact the necessary union that deals with this sector. That's one. Two, there's need for us to also talk about the domestication of Convention 189 in Nigeria, because that one has provided the basis on how domestic workers should be treated. It has spelled out the decent work for domestic workers. So as we say, we have this convention has been domesticated like 190. At least they have provided a legal ground for domestic workers to be regarded as a worker like you and me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the panelists and of course the researchers for the 3 wonderful works. My name is Dr. Kaisho. I work with the Nigerian Labour Congress. Let me begin with the second presentation on Inugu and Wari. Even though the panelists have also raised significant question on the question of epistemology and methodology. So my observation is that the 2 cases can be discussed under the premise of the national question, because they are addressing issues of deprivation, regional imbalances, inequalities. So if they are discussed within that premise, at the end we can make a recapitulation and to develop other meta-theoretical analysis that underpin what happens in Wari and the other overarching question in Inugu sit at home. So that can really help us to address one of the epistemological questions raised by Dr. Husseini. And at the same time, we can build emancipatory strategy because it is a contestation with also Nigerian state. The second observation is on the domestic work. What I have seen is a good work, but of course, in terms of the policy recommendation, I expect to see more in terms of what form of social dialogue can we have in this arena of a care economy, and at the same time is organizing in the informal sector. Because some of the audiences here are from the trade unions. If the research should be able to inform action, and the actors in that sector are the workers' organization. Then the second thing, what strategies should also be pursued in terms of labor inspection, even though it is inspection in the context of the informal sector. The third one has to do also with the mapping. If it mapped other associations or trade unions that could be relevant for imposing freedom of association in that sector, it could be relevant. I know it's an informal sector, organizing it may have different innovative approach. On the methodology, I think a research of this nature, even though it has been highlighted by one of the panelists, it should be emancipatory. It should use more of decolonizing methodologies where the subject of the research is a knowing subject. Let the subject of the research speak more. Then we can use more of interpretivist framework or the phenomenological framework highlighted by one of the panelists so that you can make your analysis. But using positivist approach, so you are approaching from the top, the biases even of the researcher are there. So I think this is emancipatory approach would be better where you get more of the voices of the respondent so there you can generate strategies for action. But it's a commendable work and I look forward to see more of it. Thank you very much.
So much. My name is Josephine Alabi. I work for Kin and Care Initiative. I really commend the researchers and the panelists because I'll say all these 3 research works is just a beautiful one. And we gathering here to listen is also showing us some root causes, despite the fact that maybe due to the time frame, the methodology used, all those things might not be sufficient enough. One of the ones that really caught my attention is the one by the Group 3, where you talked about the impact of the farmer headers crisis. And Comrade Boti, you said something about Lake Chad. We all know about Lake Chad. Yes, it's drying up. And I've listened also to some rural women whereby they said, they will tell you, and some farmers, they will tell you that there are some particular trees, species, that when you see them, it shows that it gives you a sign, but those things are not really there enough. And gradually, we are losing things to nature. Or maybe, is it because of certain things, what could have happened? Then, you now mentioned about the headers migrating. So, which means the space is not really sufficient enough for them. And then you came up with something like some governments or maybe state governments saying that you need to stay in a particular area to graze or not graze it. But if we learn from developed countries, for instance, like Germany, you find out that they've been making use of certain what will I call it? Like examples whereby it's even more sufficient. Your animals will be more nutritious when they are gathered in a place rather than migrating, suffering them, and maybe eating up people's crops. So I think, is there any way, I believe that this document is really so good, but could you throw more light? I'm trying to answer, throw questions to Comrade Boti now. Could you maybe in some few words or maybe pointers, what do you think? Because this thing has been recurring. What do you think we can do? How do we go about it so that we can cut short so many things? Because you heard of different killings here and there. Not even just in Buhari alone, some other locations that farmers cannot go. And things prices of foodstuffs are getting higher and higher. So what do you think? How do you think that we could go about this? Just a few. All right.
At least the name, please. My comment is on domestic workers. This is a very, very critical study and a critical issue. I want to draw attention to ILO Convention 189 of 2011, which appropriately addressed the issue of domestic work and domestic workers as being critical to the national economy. It argued that those people who do this domestic work play a critical role in national economies, although they are undervalued. If you see in Nigeria, all of you sitting here, you probably have house girl or house boy on which your whole family stability depends. But what happens to them? We underpay them, we abuse them, we treat them as second-class citizens. But the critical issue I want to draw attention to is to the impact of application of regular labor laws to domestic workers. In Brazil, 2013, they approved the domestic workers legislation, which raised the level of payment. See what happens? All of us were paying 5,000, 10,000, maybe maximum 15,000, 20,000. That is for serious madams. Averagely, I remember NLC, 100 years of ILO, did a special program on domestic workers, and it was extensively discussed and argued that Nigerian NGOs and Nigerian labor organization should proceed to process legislation on domestic workers. So, because when Brazil did it, it automatically reduced the level of poverty. Because people who are being paid 5,000, 20,000, if you put them, I remember some at that NLC program, some of the madams say, am I going to pay my house girl minimum wage? You know, they raise the question, they say, how can I pay her? And these domestic workers depend seriously on them. So I want to commend Rosa Luxemburg, the Gender Studies Department of Bayero University, and Dr. Angela Oda that put this on the agenda. I think more advocacy should be done on domestic workers. There are so many in Nigeria, and if proper legislation is done and their income is raised and their abuse is reduced, because in Brazil their income is raised, they have regular hours, they have holidays and things like that, a substantial number of people under poverty suddenly were raised above poverty. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. My name is Betty Abba. I came in from Lagos this morning. Dr. Claus, good to see you. I really want to commend the panelists for a very brilliant performance. I want to especially thank Rosa Luxemburg, Dr. Claus, Mrs. Angela for your very deep interest in the conditions of domestic workers in Nigeria and how to respond appropriately to this. Just a quick response to the last two speakers. We're actually working with the support of Rosa Luxemburg on unionization of domestic workers in Nigeria. And I'm really, really impressed. I'm very grateful to Rosa Luxemburg for this multidimensional approach, not just spotlighting the conditions of domestic workers in Nigeria, which I believe is unparalleled, unprecedented, but also looking for ways to respond adequately to this. Like Prof said, in so many countries, even in Africa, in Kenya, in Uganda, South Africa, and other places, especially in India, domestic workers have very vibrant unions. You can't humiliate them, you can't violate their human rights, they have regular working hours, they have minimum wage, and all kinds of rights. They are part of the mainstream labor union. And that is what we want to see happen in Nigeria. And we're looking for a situation where when we have this kind of gathering, domestic workers are also present. We're not just talking on their behalf. They have to be part of the conversation so that they know their rights. Now, our organization Sea Hope runs a shelter in Lagos, and I can tell you, majority of the people who have been brought to the shelter are domestic workers who have been abused, especially sexually abused. And it's an ongoing but unspoken epidemic in Nigeria, a sexual abuse of domestic workers. And most of them don't even know their rights. It has to take neighbors and other people to report and all of that. So I believe this kind of project will actually spotlight it and will find answers. We're looking at an ideal situation where domestic workers will have to be part of the mainstream labor union, and then they have all kinds of knowledge, consciousness about their rights. So I really want to thank Rosa Luxemburg again, Dr. Claus, who is here from Senegal, and Mrs. Angela. Both of them have been exceptionally supportive. So we are having a seminar tomorrow. If you have time, you can come NUJ Secretariat 2 to 4 p.m. To discuss on unionization of domestic workers in Nigeria. So it's like another step forward from this discussion. Thank you very much.
I think my own comments and recommendations. First is to thank the RLS or RLF for creating a one-day university. I think when I was listening to the reviewers, I thought I was in a graduate seminar, listening to a doctoral presentation, a proposal presentation. I think a lot of good work, good thinking has happened in the area. And I think the challenges that they raise, the reviewer, has in part to do with the challenges also in social science research methodology instruction. I think it's an area, so if anything, when I see this kind of gap, is a call again that we need to strengthen that area across social sciences. I think the next thing I want to focus on is that I will regard this work and subsequently for RLF and RLS, two things, recommendation. One is that there should be pre-filled workshop for every of these major study. I don't know if Angela is listening. Pre-filled workshop, so that the methodology is stable and it can gather from a lot of diverse view on what to do. That's my first recommendation. The second recommendation will be pre-publication review. That means perhaps we have this reviewer who have reviewed the work before publication. I think that's the second recommendation I want to have. They are expensive line, but I think they are something that is very useful for a reputable organization like RLF and RLS. So these are my key recommendations. The third recommendation or observation is that we should regard, I think many of the comments that are made, this is a small study. We should regard this as exploratory study. Exploratory study. So I will wish that the comments that are made here are submitted to RLS in writing, so that when the work is going to be scaled up, anyone who ultimately, in fact, it can be published like a 3-4, something observation on doing work on these topics, and then it can be incorporated so that when it's scaled up, people can benefit from many of the comments that have been made here today. On domestic worker, that is something I know sociology departments have done a lot of work on domestic work, so it's nothing, for me, it's not a novel thing. But I have special interest in the subject matter. I don't think the starting point is unionization for various reasons. One, of course, is our legislation always presume that many laws at a threshold. You have to hire a certain number of people before certain applicability. I think what has been done in terms of unionization in other areas, in terms of helping in other countries, is to have a domestic workers' law, not unionization, whereby minimum standards are set. Because of the variety, in South Africa, for example, where I'm fairly conversant with their domestic, they actually deal with how many hours do they work. Some, whether they work full time, whether they work which will be 35 hours, or whether they work for 20 hours, because there is a choice. And this threshold, this various level of hours, have different implications under their law. And I think something we need to, because some of them might just work for 2 hours, you know you are not coming back home at 4. And you need somebody to pick your child in school, or when your child is brought home from school 4 to 6 to stand in for you. So that's a maximum of 8 hours a week. What is the implication of that? So they have guidelines for registration. You have to register them, and then they are accountable. If they work certain number of hours, you are liable to pay your own pension, some kind of pension, not at the scale of regular workers if regular is imposed. So I think we need to learn from those kind of countries whereby we can begin to protect domestic workers. As a sociologist, principally, I'm worried about the debate between formalism and informalism in African debate. I think if we go the formalism route, it can do there are many dangers to our system. Today, Nigeria is sustained by the informal economy. The racketeering that happen more, the destructive racketeering is actually almost directly proportionally related to the size and the formalism of our organizations. So if you see the organization that had the highest corruption, the more dangerous and destructive level of lack of transparency, they are the one that also attend CBN, NNPC, and the rest of them. So I'm a little bit worried about this. So we must find somewhere between regulation and over formalization of our agents, of our realities. And I think when we're doing things like domestic work, I think that should guide us in such a way that we do not trap them into usual formal economy in a way that becomes detrimental to those category of people. So finally, again, I return to thanking the reviewers and also for the researchers. I do know the methodology in the textbooks is different from the methodology in practice. And not only in Nigeria, not only in Africa is more prevalent in this area, but also in the US. But I think one part of the problem is even the lack of sensors and the lack of NPC population, even giving us an area, for example, in other countries you want to study like, INEC, they will tell you the number of electoral areas. Without those kind of information and the rest of it, research will continue to be a problem in terms of applying some extremely rigorous methodology of sampling. So I can understand the challenge, but we must continue to trudge on. Thank you so much.
Thank you to our very.
Honestly, I'm overwhelmed with this wonderful program today. I intend to go to somewhere, but when I was asked to come and represent the NSC of the FCT, my coming, I think I have gained a lot. Actually, I was having 2 or 3 questions, but my prof, that's number 3 and number 4, has taken the questions. But however, I have just one question to ask. We have identified Buhari crisis or conflicts, and the conflict that has been on for over years in Enugu sit at home. Why is it so difficult to identify the problems of Enugu sit at home? And I remember when Lady Yar'Adua was the president of this country, the Niger Delta came to Abuja and blocked the road. And the president said, come, let's sit at the round table and discuss. And their problem was identified. And the Niger Delta was given. Today they have peace in Niger Delta. Why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to solve the problems of sit at home in Enugu? That's the question to Dr. Hussein. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Mustafa Abubakar, FSI. I want to comment on the domestic workers in northwestern Nigeria. Mine is just a suggestion to find out where these domestic workers are coming from. I also wanted to talk about the unionization, but some speakers have already talked about it. But when you talk about domestic workers in northwestern Nigeria, or in the north in particular, where are most of these girls or the workers coming from, especially the girl child? They are coming from Niger State, particularly the Nupe speaking area of Niger State. Yes, Kasa. Unfortunately, yeah, I'm part of them, but I have to speak about it. Why do we have so much Nupe girls being sent out as house helps? What is the root cause? Why are the parents not being able to send these children in spite of the century where we are having so much talk about girl child education, free education, women liberalization? Why are these girls mostly the ones being used as house helps? I think we have to go back and fight. Niger State, Kogi State, Kwara State, the Patigi area, mostly the Nupe-speaking area. I think when we are doing our research, perhaps we can engage the governor. Even the governor should come in. What is he doing to liberalize these girls? Because in every home or in every state you go to, a Nupe girl is there as a household. Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Zezemwanje Vicharisi from the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, NILS National Assembly. I want to thank the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for this wonderful gathering. This is a very wonderful one. I really learned a lot today. I want to thank Ms. Angela for her unwavering support for women, especially students. I am happy to see a lot of students when I came here. I want to thank the panelists. They really did a lot of work. I was even imagining myself in a defense proposal or maybe a defense like it was very hot. My comment goes to the recommendation. The recommendation, the research work is a very interesting one. I congratulate the researchers, but I want to just lay my own voice on the recommendation. I was expecting some actionable recommendations. I believe that this issue we are here for today are directly affecting women. As such, the recommendation should also be an avenue to advocate for more women representation in governance. What do I mean? I believe that if we have more women, especially at the National Assembly, we can be able to reduce some of the problems we are having now. Imagine the 10th Assembly, we only have 7.6% representation of women. It's a very big problem. So we need people that can be able to take our issues at the table of the National Assembly. Do we need more laws to protect domestic workers? Do we need to amend the existing laws? Who is going to bring up these bills, even if it's establishment or amendment bills? Nobody will represent us more than we. So this book that is expected to go far, I expected that women advocacy should would have been an avenue to also advocate for more women representation in Nigerian governance. Thank you.
All right. The strategy for unionizing domestic workers. I am up for it. It's a very great idea, but I want us to have one thing behind our minds and prepare ourselves around the domestic workers. Somebody just mentioned Niger State, where the domestic workers are very prevalent. There is no homogeneity among the domestic workers, the characteristics of domestic workers across the country. It must be noted. And that secondly, there is also no homogeneity in terms of the types of abuses, that they also suffer. And in terms of how the culture of their own immediate environment also affect the psychology and their vulnerability. So these things have to be put into consideration. For those of us that are trying to unionize domestic workers, for instance, the typical domestic worker from Katsina State and from Kano State is about 15-year-old on the average. This person is from an extremely poor family. She willingly, or her family willingly, gives her out for domestic work. It is for them, in part, a strategy for poverty alleviation. So, and that girl is not educated enough. Culturally, she also has her own hindrances. How are you going to unionize such a person? How are you going to find her to talk to her? And I think this is part of the challenges the researchers that worked on domestic violence in Katsina State, although I also want to say that they were also rather not sufficiently courageous. I think they were too protective of the culture and this environment where they think they are also affected and will not want to expose enough. And I think that was not quite correct, as a researcher needed to be quite objective. So we need to put this in mind, and it's very important. When you want to unionize domestic workers, which domestic workers? There are some domestic workers that have secondary school, especially the ones that you see in Abuja here. They are here, they have secondary school certificate. They are here to work for 2 or 3 years, get some little money. They speak well. They can come out. They are very neat. And those are the ones that you see that they are getting probably 20,000, 25,000 naira. They will not, in fact, they will bargain. Those ones individually, they are educated enough to even bargain for their rights. If you don't give them sufficiently what they want, they can just wake up in the morning and tell you that they're off. But these other ones that we're talking about, in Katsina, in Kano, they don't even have a place to go to. One has been married maybe 3 times. Her husband has rejected her. Her parents do not have space for her to come back. So she finds a refuge in that home. How do you want to organize her? So I think, for me, beyond trade union, beyond organizing, it's important that the law somebody talks about labor inspection. Once upon a time, you could go into homes in this country to inspect even your living condition in your homes. So it is possible to inspect, to do inspection and find out anybody. We have the child trafficking law. As many of these children, in fact, there's also the issue of child trafficking involved in it. An agent goes to pack them from one village, takes them somewhere. She doesn't even know how much she's being paid. She has no idea. So these are things that we can monitor. I think it's important. Unionizing, okay. But also in terms of checking and making sure that the interest of these people is also put into consideration, is also about, and then finally, it is also important that we also formalize domestic work. And some of these things some of us have been saying for a long time. Why can't we have crèches funded by government in strategic location? And so some of these enlightened domestic workers, you can work there as a caregiver formally. Why don't we formalize even the cleaning of homes? So you can get people from a formal organization to come to do this work, and they get paid for it. So I think these are some of the other strategies we can use. And when you do that formalization, you are not entirely, and Prof. Sir, I don't know, for me, I think we cannot continue to glorify or to maintain an informal economy, because it comes with a lot of vulnerabilities. It comes with a lot of negativities. They don't have social protection. They cannot, you cannot easily, there's so much vulnerability around there. There's no permanence. This is a work that does not have promotion. Yeah? This is a job that you don't have skills, that does not require any special skill. No salary increase. It just comes at the whims and caprices of the person that is there. So, but then, there's a lot. The political economic question of domestic work, I think, has to be properly analyzed, has to be properly considered, in terms of what action we want to do, we want to take going forward. Thank you.
Some of the recommendations proposed in this report or study, like I mentioned, were more adaptive solutions. And in implementing some of these solutions, the government needs to be more strategic, one, and then they need to be more conscious of the need of these people. They are vulnerable. One, in most of the states where we have them, nobody thinks of them, nobody cares if they live. So what can be done is for states, the governments of these states, to be more deliberate in terms of how do we change the stories of these ones? How do we help them to adapt to the situation they found themselves? And meaning that concrete programs that you can measure the impact should be implemented. Again, that also requires one thing: funding from the state government. So you don't see in any of the state governments where they have sufficient allocation to address IDP issues. Talk less of women in IDPs. So there is a need for the state government to be deliberate in whatever actions or programs they will put in place to address the plights of women and girls in IDP camps. And I'm coming to the preventive measure. Of course, it boils down to issues around security and then management of resources and all of that. At the national level, one of the things that we have talked about as one of the measures to address the impact of climate change. For example, government needs to spend or invest heavily on irrigation system in the far north, which again will allow some level of green grass to flourish around there, and farmers around there also to flourish. So what is the level of investment around these capital projects? At federal level, that investment is lacking. And you never see such budgetary allocation made for, because the fund needed for that kind of project is huge. And government is always trying to avoid or dodge it. So we need to begin to build advocacy around that government needs to invest in critical infrastructures that will help reduce the various the challenges leading to this conflict. And then again, there have been several programs. They talked about the Ruga, they talked about the national grazing policy, they talked about the ranching policy. Of course, there are challenges with that, and people have expressed their concerns over all of these things. For example, they say, if you are saying they should give them ranching, that you are automatically ceding a portion of your lands to the Fulanis and all of that, and then they become one of the, along the line, they become dominant tribe or what have you within your communities. But because there are no concrete action plans or framework for implementing the framework, and with rules and legislative work to back the support, it becomes difficult. People will not accept it when they are not seeing that concrete reality of what it means for us, what or how it will affect our lives in the long run. So government needs to be deliberate in all of its actions to ensure that they are able to address these issues both in the long term, short term, and even in the intermediate. Thank you.
Why is government not having a roundtable discussion with the IPOB people, so as to find the lasting solution to the crisis of the sit at home in Enugu? Yes, so I want to say that I think that just has to do with the whole politics going on in the country. Because the Igbos are not the only people seeking self-determination. There are also a number of groups and communities in Nigeria that are also seeking self-determination. I know the North Central people who are also seeking for, in fact, even the Oduduwa people at the point were also seeking for self-determination. So the thing has become a much bigger problem for government to handle. And that's why I think they are silent on the IPOB thing, because if they want to go addressing the IPOB thing, it might generate a lot of other issues, a lot of other groups will want to get up also demanding, self-determination. Of course, you remember that it didn't start now. The Igbo agitation started right from shortly after independence in 1966, and it has continued till today. It has not stopped. So I think it's just the whole politics, around self-determination and the government not willing to discuss that, put it on the table at all. So it doesn't create a much bigger problem for them to handle. That's why it is, that's my opinion here actually, because the study did not suggest that. But I think that's what is actually going on here. And because they don't want this thing to become a major problem, they are just letting it lie low. But in doing that, they are also aggravating the situation in the Southeast because they don't want to back down at all. It is even becoming much more serious. You travel to the Southeast, you're sitting on the edge, like you're just watching everywhere you go because you don't know where the next crisis can erupt from, all over the place. I went for accreditation in Imo State, and the speed with which we were doing the work, like they told us, you cannot be in this particular place at this particular time, so you have to do week and get back to your hotel room and all of that. So this thing is creating much more bigger problems for the people in the Southeast. Beyond the fact that it's affecting their economy, the security of that place, of the entire region of the Southeast is actually a big problem. You cannot hold a burial in some communities without going to the people to take permission. You can't do a wedding without going to them to take permission. They must give you permission to do anything. Otherwise, they could just bump into that place, scatter it for you, kidnap as many people as they want to kidnap. And I mean, these are some of the things that I think that government really needs to pay attention. We cannot continue like this. We are talking about, the keynote speaker talked about food security. It's a major challenge. Because all of these things are creating much bigger problems. People cannot go to farms, people cannot go to markets on certain days, people cannot go to work on certain days, and it affects productivity. So I think that beyond us just sitting here to discuss the output of this research, there is need for government to pay attention to all of these issues that we are raising in different forums, because it's not just here, it's everywhere, but they seem to just close their eyes to it. Nobody seems to take it as a very serious problem, but it's affecting all of us, whether we like it or not. Thank you very much.
And that's right. Thank you very much, Professor Magdalene Ngolo, and to all our panelists, we say thank you again.
Wow, dear friends of Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, because for you all to be here
and to have participated so actively. Hardly do you go to any program in Abuja that at the end of it all you have people, all seated, because the hall was fuller, but it's still full. And thank you also very much. You are all friends of Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, and we appreciate it, immensely that you took time off your busy schedules to be here and, to share the good times we've had together. It has been such an intellectually stimulating discussion on the 3 studies. As the discussants rightly said, when critiques like this, provide opportunity for not just the researchers, but for other researchers. We have students here. You can see where they got it right, where the gaps are. The reality is that the discussion continues, and we have, for us as Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, we created the platform for these researchers to be able to do this study. I need to restate that whatever conclusions they reach does not reflect, our position as a foundation. But we will continue to support initiatives like this, studies like this, that will provide opportunity for discussion, because it's only when we dialogue. We live in a world at the moment that is war all over the place. In Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, Hamas, and Israel. But the reality is that after all the war, after all the killings, we must come and sit down at the table to discuss on the way forward. Because that's the only way it's only with peace that you can have development in society. So for each and every one of you here, I say a very big thank you. Because without you, this program would not have achieved its objective. For the researchers, Paris, the Veritas researchers, the CGS, BUK, Center for Gender Studies, Bayero University, Kano, we appreciate you. And we hope that from the constructive criticisms you've received, these works can be further improved. And of course, the conversation continues, because we're also going to have roundtables in Kano. We're going to have roundtables within Abuja here on these studies, to further discuss and also bring various stakeholders together. So the discussion continues across the country. Also in Lagos, we have roundtables built on this. That's Dr. Klaus-Dieter Koenig. Without him, none of this would have happened. One thing I appreciate about my boss, and it's not to flatter you, is that whenever you meet with him, he's with a notepad and he takes notes. And this public presentation actually, in fact, these studies are a product of the meeting he had with our partners in 2022. So whenever you meet with him, he listens, he takes notes, and he takes it up. So thank you very much for providing the resources that made all this possible. Thank you.